Good evening, I'm Savannah Kelly. Welcome to APTN National News. A Manitoba man who has been charged for killing 5 family members this week has a history of substance abuse and was warned by a judge to seek help before his life spirals out of control. Tamara Pimentel reports.
Ryan Manakisik of Garden Hill First Nation in northern Manitoba faces 5 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of his common-law partner, Amanda Clearwater, her 17-year-old niece, Maya Lee Grattan, and their children, 6-year-old Bethany, 4-year-old Javen, and 2.5-month-old Isabella Manakisik. He has a record. 3 years ago, Manakisik was warned by a provincial court judge that he needed help with his methamphetamine addiction. Manakisik was convicted of mischief that time and sentenced to 18 months probation. Court heard he had locked himself in a garage in Winnipeg, was delirious, and damaged the door. He was treated for psychosis. And the next day, he went to a coffee shop in Winnipeg where he threw glass mugs, causing them to shatter. Employees locked themselves in a back room and called 911. Manakisik was charged again in 2021 for impaired driving. On Sunday, RCMP found Clearwater's body in a ditch near Carman. Hours later, they were called to a vehicle fire on a highway near St. Eustache, west of Winnipeg. Officers say Manakisik pulled his 3 children out of the vehicle, but they were all pronounced dead at the scene. Grattan's body was later found at their home in Carman. In an obituary, a thank you went out to the Manitoba community for standing behind the family during this devastating time. Manakisik is set to appear in court on the murder charges on February 23rd. He remains in custody, and the charges have not been tested in court. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
The Northwest Territories, Nunavut, and Quebec are the only places in Canada where there's no missing persons legislation as called for by the MMIWG inquiry. The NWT government promised legislation in 2020, but they have yet to deliver. Carly Schogner spoke with a former MMIWG commissioner about how this affects the disappearance of Frank Grubin, missing from Fort Smith for 9 months.
Hard getting up every day, not knowing where your son is. So I just want to get the message out there. If anyone has any information, please come forward.
I hope that the Grubin family is getting the support that they need, and that they are not being left alone to navigate these issues. Like, these are complex legal issues. Oh, in terms of the need for missing persons legislation, specifically call for Justice 5.8, it's very sad to me that that is something that has not been prioritized, that it's not something that has been implemented. That's concerning. And that means the families of 80 people who are left with heartbreak in question. It's also not the most complicated legislation. There are examples of it in very effective functioning models throughout the country. And I would point to Ontario as having developed quite robust legislation in this area. I would also look to the Yukon for how they've developed and also co-developed their legislation with stakeholders, and particularly Indigenous communities and grassroots. That gap was something that we heard from government and police forces as being something that was needed. We also heard it from families and survivors who were suffering the unimaginable horror of not knowing where their loved one was, and there being basically a dead-end road when it came to the work of police to try to uncover what has happened or where their loved ones was, because there was no clear indication of criminal activity in the course of the disappearance. Really get the sense that Frank's family feels abandoned, and they feel like they are alone. And I can really understand where that comes from. And, you know, there is a responsibility on the part not only of the RCMP, but the GNWT and the support services from the government, from the public government, as well as the communities that the group and family comes from, to support them and advocate for them as well. I can understand why the family would wonder and be fearful that homophobia and anti-Indigenous sentiments played a role. And in our forensic audit of historic files, we did find that these types of prejudices and assumptions about Indigenous women and gender diverse people did play a role in investigative decisions. And it wasn't just facts. Somebody knows something, and I think we have to keep saying his name, and we have to keep talking about this and supporting the family and hope that answers come.
I'm gonna put signs everywhere, like right here.
More about the disappearance of Frank Grubin on aptnnews.ca/investigates. You can also check out Carly's 4-part web series on aptnnews.ca. On this Valentine's Day, one of the largest gatherings took place in Vancouver, where thousands have taken to the streets to demand answers and justice for so many missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls across the country. APTN's Tina House joins us now from there.
Thank you. We're here on the downtown east side of Vancouver at the 33rd Annual March for the Murdered or Missing Indigenous Women and Girls. Joining me today is Angela Marie McDougall. Angela, you are the Executive Director of the Battered Women's Support Services, but you've also been involved with this for a very long time. Tell me how this march began.
This march began with the brutal killing of Cheryl Anjou in 1992 as a way to honor her memory and to make visible her killing, and a way for families to grieve.
Since her killing, and obviously before as well, there's been many women that have been killed down here and are still continuing to be missing. You knew many of those women. Can you tell me about a few of them?
Well, one of the things that we started to see after the killing of Cheryl Anjou was an increase in missing and murdered women here from this neighborhood, and the disappearances, and women were killed. And so we know that there were at least 3 serial killers that were operating in this neighborhood through the 1990s, and that one of them we know has got a bit more attention, but there were at least three serial killers at the time. So the march has been really important way to make visible, but also to mourn and to seek justice, and it's been a vital way for community to organize.
We've covered this march now many times. I know that along the route that they're about to do, they stop and honor the women at certain places where their bodies were found or where they went missing from. It's such a touching moment. We've got hundreds, or actually thousands of people joining us today that are in the march. Family members, advocates, community supporters. What do you want to say to the public about how important it is to know about this issue?
Well, it's so important, and particularly because we know that Indigenous women have been leading this effort for years and making visible the disappearances and the killings. And so the honoring of the memories and the spirits of women who have passed, and to recognize those that are missing, has been so important. It's a way to heal. It's also a way for families to speak out. And it's been a galvanizing march, one of the unique organizing efforts that probably is unique around the world. I don't think there's anything like it that's lasted for 33 years to draw attention to such a huge social issue. And we continue to seek justice.
February the 22nd, serial killer Robert Pickton is up for parole. Many of the family members and community supporters never thought that day would come, but we're literally a week away from there. What do you think of the fact that Robert Pickton has a chance at parole after all this time?
It's appalling. Can you imagine, actually, that how the trauma that family members and the community is experiencing, knowing that this is a possibility? But it really tells us the limitations, doesn't it, of the Canadian legal system, that this could actually be a fact. That this man that's killed so many women and who has done so much harm to families and to this community could actually have a time to seek freedom is just appalling. But really, it is the limitation of the Canadian legal system that we would even be in this situation.
Speaking of the justice system, the RCMP have moved to destroy the evidence found and collected during the investigation. That next hearing is actually scheduled for February the 23rd, the day after his parole hearing. What are your thoughts on that?
It's all just a major insult. It's an insult to the process initially, to all of the work that families have done, to the victims. It's a betrayal. It's devastating in so many ways. But again, it tells us clearly what the limitations are with policing, with the criminal legal system, in attempting to deal with this very serious social issue that's been with us through the very making of Canada as a nation.
Obviously, our thoughts and prayers are with so many of those family members out there still seeking answers, still seeking justice for their loved ones. And thank you so much for all the work that you do on the front lines. We really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you. Back to you in studio.
The James Smith Cree Nation in Saskatchewan has a new emergency alert system they hope will help prevent incidents like the September 2020 mass stabbing that killed 11 people and seriously injured another 17. Video journalist Rachel May was at the official unveiling.
2 weeks ago, the inquest into the mass stabbings on James Smith Cree Nation and the nearby village of Weldon wrapped up. The inquest was held to provide recommendations to prevent similar deaths from happening in the future, with 29 recommendations made from the jury and the presiding coroner. One of the recommendations was for RCMP and James Smith to implement a public safety strategy. A new app will allow Indigenous communities across Saskatchewan to send out emergency alerts to their communities as events are unfolding. The first alerts app will be incorporated into an existing app called the Talking Stick. It provides Indigenous people with peer support 24/7. The app has been approved by Apple to have an alert designation, which means that notifications can be sent out despite phones being on silent or in airplane mode. As the app is not connected to the provincial emergency alert system, the alerts will be able to go out ahead of RCMP alerts, provided individuals have the app downloaded. The app is now available for all First Nations across Saskatchewan. Rachel May, APTN National News, James Smith Cree Nation.
And Rachel will have that full story tomorrow. Algonquin First Nations from Quebec were in Ottawa to voice opposition to a plan to build a radioactive dump on their territory. Last week, the Kebewak First Nation filed a federal court application for a judicial review of the approval. Today, in a show of support, they were joined by members of the Bloc Québécois and the Green Party. Here's Annette Francis with that story.
Chiefs, community members and allies of the Algonquin nations in Quebec gathered with signs and drums for a small rally on Parliament. They united in opposition of a radioactive disposal facility at Chalk River. Sasha Hybricks came to show her support. She works with the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society. She said it's important to put a halt on the project to find a safer solution.
I think the best option would be the deep geological reservoir that they've done in other countries, such as like Finland and Sweden, where you really you bury the waste deep underground, far away from water sources that are important for the Indigenous communities and all of the local communities.
The Vice Chief of Temiskaming First Nation is pleased with the support, but says more people should be concerned about the issue.
This water is going to affect everybody, not just us, but everybody in the 7 generations down the line. So we would really like to have maybe a little more support coming from our neighboring non-Indigenous communities.
Last month, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, or CNSC, gave the green light for the Chalk River nuclear facility to build a place to dispose of 1 million cubic meters of low-level radioactive waste, such as contaminated clothing and building materials. However, it is located 1 kilometer from the Ottawa River. Before the rally, chiefs and politicians held a press conference in Parliament. Chief Lance Haymond of the Kebewak First Nation said the Ottawa River holds immense cultural, spiritual, and historical importance to the Anishinaabe people. It runs through unceded ancestral lands on which their nations hold title and rights.
Last week's decision by the Supreme Court in C-92 reminded everyone that First Nations have ancestral rights protected by the Constitution, including the inherent right to self-government. So it's as a chief of a government that I present myself here to ask the current federal government, nation to nation, to step in and stop the the nonsense decision made by the CNSC.
Green Party co-leader Elizabeth May stood in support of the chief's calls for a halt. She said the CNSC is once again rubber stamping a project.
So we have a situation again where the words are really clear. Say them again: free, prior, and informed consent. The word prior is very important here because, as you've heard, the Indigenous peoples of the area were not consulted about the location of the site.
The Chalk River facility is expected to last 550 years, but the chiefs say they'll continue to fight to stop the development until they've been consulted and a better plan for storage is in place. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
An Innu woman's goal to build her dream cabin has landed her in the middle of a territorial dispute. We'll tell you about it after this short break. Stick around. Welcome back to APTN National News. Nova Scotia's Supreme Court recently certified a class action. It's against 2 radiologists who conducted medical procedures on 59 people without consent. In 2017, 59 members of the Pictou Landing First Nation participated in a heart and mind study, which included MRI scans. The lawsuit alleges Dr. Sharon Clark and Dr. Robert Miller conducted additional MRI scans on participants' livers for their own study. Clark and Miller admitted they shared the data at a radiology conference. They also did not report to 2 participants that the scans revealed health issues. Chief Andrea Paul is the primary plaintiff. She was recently elected as the Assembly of First Nations Regional Chief of Nova Scotia. No date has been set for the trial. An Innu woman just wanted to build her dream cottage in Quebec. Little did Claudie Paul know she'd be caught in a territorial dispute between her Innu community and the Huron-Wendat First Nation. It resulted in an eviction notice and damage to her property by the Huron-Wendat. And although Paul's community reimbursed her, she says Quebec's legal system wasn't up to the task of helping her. Here's a report from Shushan Bacon, voiced by Maricela Amador.
S'il y a un groupe décide qui revendique un droit territorial, puis qu'il y a une croyance de droit qui peut être ambiguë, mais qui est là et réelle, ben, on n'est pas protégé.
Claudie Paul is arriving at the cottage she's been building. She's been working on it a while, despite some obstacles. In the spring of 2022, the Huron-Wendat Nation affirmed its territorial rights over the land the cottage was being built upon.
C'est quelque chose. C'est quelque chose d'avoir fait ça.
They also used large machinery to tear up the land so Paul couldn't build. Please be advised, you are not authorized to build on our land. The Neo-Wensio. Paul is Innu, from the nation of Mashtoyats. Last August, she met with a prosecutor from Quebec's Director of Criminal and Penal Prosecutions to discuss the destruction of her land. This followed on a complaint she filed with provincial police in Saguenay. The response she received was, the Director of Criminal and Penal Prosecutions has concluded that no charges will be laid in relation to this event. According to Paul, the Huron-Wendat belief in their ancestral rights is untested but powerful.
Sur cette croyance réelle de droit-là qui fait que, eux autres ont des droits, ce groupe-là a des droits, ben finalement, nous autres, on peut pas poursuivre.
Claudie Paul wonders whether the DCPP understands Indigenous rights enough to make an informed decision.
Je pense qu'il y a eu des gens frileux là-dedans, puis on voulait pas trop embarquer, surtout que c'était 2 groupes autochtones. Il y a comme un peu un litige entre les deux. Mais en même temps, ils ont une responsabilité. Le Québec a une responsabilité de nous défendre. Le droit criminel et pénal, ça relève du Québec. Fait qu'on se sent un peu laissé tomber là-dedans. En tout cas, de mon côté, puis je pense que je suis pas la seule. On se dit là, c'est quoi? C'est œil pour œil, dent pour dent, sur le territoire.
Compensation from her band council allowed her to keep building. Gilbert Dominique, Chief of the Pequot-Communuat-Taquagan First Nation, has questions of his own about how the Director of Prosecution handles First Nations files.
Inconcevable que sur la base qu'il y a une divergence sur la notion et que c'est pas clair la notion des droits ancestraux, on n'a pas le droit, malgré tout ça, de porter préjudice là, par un saccage à des membres de nos Premières Nations ou même à des Québécois là.
Paul has signed a power of attorney ahead of further litigation. Since January 30th, 2023, the Pequot-Communuats First Nation has been suing the Huron-Wendat Nation for damages in Quebec Superior Court. In 2004, the community of Maastrichtians, along with 3 other Innu nations, signed an agreement in principle for a future treaty with Quebec and Canada, where the Nitassinan of Maastrichtians is in green. Despite it being the only remaining Huron-Wendat community, Wendake is located in Innu territory on the map, which is in blue. The Huron-Wendat did not respond to APTN's request for an interview. Claudie Paul has put her heart into her dream cottage.
En tout cas, moi, là-dedans, je me suis sentie assez seule, là, honnêtement, là, avec le pouvoir du DPCP, le pouvoir de la Sûreté du Québec. Tout est comme, bon, on dit non. Bon, ben non, c'est non. OK, moi, ça s'arrête là. Moi, j'ai aucun droit. J'ai pas le droit à la sécurité, pas le droit d'être protégé par la Sûreté du Québec. J'ai pas le droit. Fait que, tu sais, tu te ramasses démuni, mais c'est pas normal, là. Au Québec, j'ai des droits comme les autres, là, tu sais.
She worries about others who own property in the territory, both First Nations and non-Indigenous people. She believes no one is protected by the law if anyone can claim a territorial right based on what they believe. A story by Shushan Bacon, APTN National News, in Niowencio and/or Nitassinan.
We need to take one more short break. Our photo of the day and weather are coming up after this. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Kelsey Weber shared this sweet photo of her little Valentine, Adeline Weber. Between the roses, balloons, and unicorns, they've set the bar very high for the rest of us. Thanks for sharing that, Kelsey. Send your photos to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Over to the east coast, -1 in rain in Fredericton, 0 degrees in Halifax. Nain, snowy and -9, Happy Valley, Goose Bay, -5. Montreal, rainy and -3, Saguenay, -10. Sault Ste. Marie, 0 degrees there, North Bay, -3 and snow. Wawa, -12 and flurries there, Thunder Bay, snowy and -4. God's Lake, -21 there, Puckatawagan, sunshine, -22. Dauphin, -14, Winnipeg, sunshine, -12. Yorkton, snowy and -14, Saskatoon, sunshine, -14. Stony Rapids, sunshine and -21, Buffalo Narrows, -14. Sunshine and -9 for Peace River, Fort McMurray, -8. -8 in Edmonton and Red Deer, snowy and -12. Bella Coola, sunshine, 3 degrees there, Kamloops, -3. Prince George, sunshine, -7, Fort Nelson, -6. Beaver Creek, sunny and -12, Mayo, -13. Norman Wells, sunny and -7 there, Wrigley, sunshine, -11. Paulatuck, sunny and -4, Colville Lake, -10. Baker Lake, -31 there, Nauyat, snowy and -27. Resolute, sunshine, -28 there, and Iqaluit, -16. And that's all the time we have for your midweek news. For news anytime, head on over to our website at aptnnews.ca. I'm Savannah Kelly. Marcy Miigwech, thank you for joining us, and happy Valentine's Day.